The morning I found out my parents had emptied my savings account wasn't the day I lost them. It was the day I finally saw who they really were. That's not the kind of thing you expect to say about your own family. But here I am, telling you a story I never thought I'd have the courage to tell. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, I believed family came first, no matter the cost. I just didn't realize how much that cost would end up being. Or that I'd be the one paying the bill. I grew up in Boulder Creek, Colorado, a quiet little town with streets lined by cottonwood trees and the kind of gas station where the cashier knows exactly what brand of gum you'll grab before you even reach the counter. In a place like that, loyalty isn't just encouraged, it's expected. Especially when it comes to family. My dad, Robert Carter, worked at the local steel plant for most of my childhood. Big hands, rough voice, the kind of man who never said I love you but thought fixing your car was the same thing. My mom, Linda, had a warm smile and a knack for baking, but she never held down a job for long. She'd float between part-time gigs, craft store cashier, school cafeteria aide, the occasional babysitting, always claiming she was helping out here and there. And then there was my older brother, Jason. Jason was the dreamer. He always had a plan, an idea, some can't-miss opportunity that required just a little help to get off the ground. One year, it was a landscaping business. The next, it was a food truck that never made it past the design stage. But no matter how many plans failed, one thing stayed the same: when he needed money, he called me. I started working young. At 16, I took my first job at Millie's Cafe, serving coffee to farmers at 5 a.m. and memorizing the exact number of sugars each of them took. The pay wasn't much, but the tips added up. Every dollar I earned, I tucked away into my savings account. Back then, I didn't know much about money, but I knew enough to understand that if I wanted to go to college or buy a house, no one was going to do it for me. By the time I was in my early 20s, I had a decent nest egg. But here's the thing about being the responsible one in the family. People start to see you as their safety net. At first, it was little things. $50 to help with the electric bill. A couple hundred for Jason's rent after he miscalculated his expenses. I told myself it was temporary, that once Dad found steady work again or Jason's new business took off, I wouldn't have to keep helping. But temporary became always. The calls kept coming. And I kept answering. I told myself this was what good daughters do. Good sisters. Good people. When you have more, you give. But what I didn't realize was that I wasn't just giving them money. I was giving them permission to keep taking, without limits, without accountability, and without gratitude. Over the years, I covered their bills, their insurance, their medical expenses. I paid for Jason's truck repairs, Mom's dental work, even a loan Dad had defaulted on. They promised to pay me back so many times I lost count. And deep down, I knew they never would. I remember one summer night, I was sitting on my apartment balcony, watching the streetlights flicker on, when Jason called. He sounded upbeat, almost giddy. Said he found a once-in-a-lifetime deal on a motorcycle and needed $3,000 by the end of the week. I told him I couldn't. That I was saving for a down payment on a house. There was a long pause, then he said, "Guess I know where I stand." And hung up. It should have been a red flag. Instead, it was just Tuesday. By the time I turned 28, I'd been the family's unofficial financial backup plan for over a decade. And I wasn't just giving them my money, I was giving up my own plans, piece by piece. I turned down trips with friends. Skipped upgrading my car. Worked overtime instead of taking vacations. Because in my mind, every dollar I spent on myself was a dollar I couldn't use to help them. Looking back now, I realize how twisted that logic was. But back then, it felt like duty. And duty was supposed to feel heavy, right? Then came that morning. It was early October, the kind of Colorado morning where the air feels sharp in your lungs and the first frost clings to the grass. I just poured my first cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. At first, I thought it was just a deposit from one of my freelance clients. But when I unlocked my phone, the message made my stomach drop. Alert, account balance negative minus $38,920.57. I blinked. Rubbed my eyes. Read it again. There was no way that number was right. My hands were shaking as I logged into my account. And that's when I saw it, transaction after transaction, each more absurd than the last. A $25,000 purchase from a Ford dealership. A $9,000 charge from a marine equipment store. Multiple withdrawals labeled family expenses. I scrolled down until my eyes blurred. The pattern was obvious. The names on the authorizations were, too. My parents. It took me a full minute to breathe again. And when I finally did, the only words in my head were, they didn't even ask. I don't remember getting dressed that morning. I just remember the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears as I drove to my parents' house. The frost was still clinging to the lawns, sparkling under the early sun, but I barely noticed. Every red light felt like a personal insult, every second ticking by another reminder that I was $39,000 in the hole, and not because of some stranger's scam. Because of them. When I pulled into their driveway, Jason's old pickup was parked out front, a brand new dirt bike tied down in the bed. My stomach turned. I didn't even knock, I walked straight in. Mom was in the kitchen, wearing her faded floral robe, flipping pancakes like it was any other day. Dad sat at the table, coffee in hand, scrolling on his phone. Jason leaned against the counter, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Emily, Mom said, as if I'd just dropped by for a visit. You want some breakfast? I set my bag down, trying to keep my voice steady. Where's my money? 3 sets of eyes blinked at me, confused, or pretending to be. Dad spoke first. What money? The money from my savings account, I said, each word sharp enough to cut. Almost $40,000. Gone. And don't act like you don't know. Jason shifted his weight, suddenly interested in the floor. Mom's smile faltered. Dad just shrugged. It's not like you were using it, he said. We needed it more. I felt heat rising in my face. That money was for my future. For a down payment on a house. For security. You had no right. Mom cut in, her voice soft, almost pleading. We're family, Emily. We share. You've always been the one who could help, and this time, well, it was a big need. I turned to Jason. What was so important you needed a brand new motorcycle and a dirt bike? He finally looked up, defensive. It's an investment. I'm starting a business, off-road adventure tours. This is my shot, Em. I almost laughed. How many shots have you had, Jason? How many times have I bailed you out? And now you don't even ask, you just take. He rolled his eyes. God, you're so dramatic. You'll make that money back in no time. You always do. That's when it hit me, not just that they didn't feel guilty, but that they expected me to get over it. Like I was some endless resource they could tap whenever they wanted. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to speak clearly. You didn't just take my money. You took my trust. And you don't get that back. Dad slammed his mug down. Oh, stop acting like a victim. This is what family does, takes care of each other. You've had more than you need for years. We were struggling. I stared at him, trying to process the twist in his logic. How is buying Jason's toys struggling? How is draining my savings taking care of each other? No one answered. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until Mom finally said, "You'll understand when you have kids. Sometimes you do what you have to do. That sentence broke something in me. Because the truth was, I had been their kid, the one they were supposed to protect, not exploit. And yet, here we were. I picked up my bag and headed for the door. Jason called after me, "Don't be like this, Em. It's not a big deal." I didn't turn around. If I did, I wasn't sure if I'd scream or cry, or both. The drive home was a blur. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I remember thinking about every time I'd skipped a vacation, every Friday night I'd stayed in to save money, every moment I'd told myself, it's worth it because I'm helping my family. And now, all I felt was foolish. That night, I sat on my couch, the bank statement open on my laptop. I called the bank, explained the situation, asked if anything could be reversed. They told me the transactions had been authorized. Not just authorized, linked to my joint access account. An account I didn't even remember setting up. When I asked how that was possible, the customer service rep hesitated before saying, "It looks like you signed the paperwork years ago, adding your parents as co-signers." And then I remembered. I was 19, opening my first account. Mom had insisted it'd be easier if they were on it too, in case of emergencies. Back then, I didn't question it. Why would I? They were my parents. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason's smirk, Dad's shrug, Mom's soft voice saying we share. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if they'd ever seen me as anything other than a safety net. The next morning, I made 3 decisions. First, I went to the bank and removed every remaining cent from any account they had access to. I opened a new account under my name only. Second, I called a lawyer. I didn't know if I could get the money back, but I wanted to know my options. Third, I turned my phone off. For the next week, I ignored every call, every text, every voicemail. Some were angry. Some were guilt trips. Some were Jason swearing his business would pay off and he'd make it right. None of them mattered. On the 8th day, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Mom was standing there, holding a pie. Her smile was tight, rehearsed. "Can we talk?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she didn't drink. "I didn't come to fight," she said. I don't want this to ruin us." I stared at her. "It's already ruined, Mom. You ruined it when you decided my future was less important than Jason's toys." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't look away. For once, I wasn't the one breaking first. She left without finishing her tea, or the pie. I put it straight into the trash. That night, I realized something. If I kept letting them back in, nothing would change. And if nothing changed, one day I'd wake up with no savings, no boundaries, and no self-respect. And I wasn't willing to live like that anymore. The week after my mother left my apartment, the silence felt different. Not heavy like before, more like a space I could finally breathe in. For the first time in years, I woke up without checking my phone for a family emergency. I made coffee, sat on my balcony, and just existed. It was both unsettling and liberating. I started small. I canceled the automatic transfers I'd been sending my parents every month since I got my first real job. I unsubscribed from the guilt that told me I was selfish for keeping my own money. Next, I sold a few things I didn't need, clothes I hadn't worn in years, furniture I'd kept out of obligation. The extra cash went straight into my new account. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I took long walks after work, rediscovering parts of the city I'd never noticed. I signed up for a weekend pottery class. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months when my clay bowl collapsed into a sad little lump. It hit me that this was the first failure in a long time that didn't cost me thousands of dollars or my peace of mind. One Saturday, I bumped into Sophie, my cousin, at the farmer's market. We hadn't talked in ages, not since a falling out between our parents years ago. She bought me a coffee and we sat on a bench under the sun. "I heard about what happened," she said gently. My chest tightened. "From who?" She shrugged. "Jason's been telling everyone you cut the family off." "Like, completely." I rolled my eyes. "Of course he is." Sophie leaned in. "For what it's worth. I think you did the right thing. You've always been the one holding everything together. Maybe it's time you let it fall apart." Her words stayed with me for days. Because deep down, I knew she was right. 3 months later, I got an email that changed everything. A small nonprofit I'd volunteered with years ago was hiring a financial consultant. It wasn't corporate money, but it was work that mattered, helping people budget, get out of debt, and build savings. I applied. I got the job. And for the first time in my career, I felt proud, not just of the paycheck, but of the purpose. The more I helped others set healthy boundaries with money, the more I realized how unhealthy mine had been. I'd spent years believing that love meant sacrifice, emptying my own cup so others could drink. But all that did was leave me thirsty, drained, and resentful. So I made a promise to myself: I would never apologize for protecting my future again. One evening, Sophie invited me over for dinner. Halfway through dessert, she lit a candle and smiled. "It's your birthday week. We should celebrate." I laughed. "I'm not really in the mood for birthdays this year." But she leaned across the table, her eyes kind. "Emily, you've survived one of the hardest years of your life. That's worth celebrating." She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a card that read, "You were never the problem, you were just the first to walk away." I felt my throat tighten. No one had ever said it like that before. I wasn't the cold, selfish person my family painted me to be. I was someone who finally recognized the difference between helping and enabling. The next day, I sat down to journal. I wrote about everything: the betrayal, the anger, the grief. But I also wrote about the peace, the laughter, and the quiet victories that had followed. By the time I set the pen down, I realized something: I didn't need closure from my family. I'd already given it to myself. 6 months after that first confrontation, my savings had grown again, not to what they were before, but enough to make me feel safe. I'd built a small circle of friends who respected my boundaries. And my work at the nonprofit was thriving. Every so often, I'd get a text from Mom. Sometimes it was just a photo of the garden, or a recipe she thought I'd like. I'd reply politely, but I didn't visit. Not yet. Maybe not ever. One quiet Sunday morning, I found myself back on that balcony with my coffee. The same spot where I'd sat, feeling lost and betrayed, months earlier. This time, the air felt warmer, softer. And for the first time, I thought about the future without fear. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: boundaries aren't walls to keep people out, they're the doors you close to protect what's worth keeping inside. And sometimes, the people you thought would guard that door with you are the ones you have to lock it against. If Emily's story made you think about your own boundaries, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in true moments of courage, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story here on True Moments Life.